Okay, back to Solomon. So, the last video was Solomon became king. So that whole thing happened between Solomon and Adonijah. And Adonijah wanted that, they called her a concubine, sort of a caregiver type for David. And that was it. Then Solomon was like to, Adonijah kind of like, that's it, you must die. Anyway, there were other reasons though, I know, but that was the end of Adonijah. So, anyway, Solomon became king and sat on the throne, and so that whole thing started, and he's up there, and now the next thing that happens is Solomon asks for wisdom, and that is in 1 Kings chapter 3, and I'm going to read that one and some of the other items here. It's kind of nice. Let me turn this on. Yeah. Okay, so chapter 3. Now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the people sacrificed at the high places because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. Okay. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. So, I don't know what he was thinking there, but okay. Now, the king, now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar at Gibeon. The Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I give you?" And Solomon said, "You have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted." Let me stop real quick and mention this. Now David was 30 when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years and then he died. So he must have been around 70 at that point. So now, when I looked for pictures to put up of Solomon taking the throne, they, like the last video for the thumbnail, they were all old men. All these guys looked like old men for Solomon. And I thought, well, according to this, he wasn't an old man. David had said he's going to build the temple and he's young and inexperienced. And here he himself says he's a little child. So, he's not a child, but he seems to be pretty young. He could have been in his around 20 or something like that. And David could still, produce children for, quite a while, I'm sure. So he might have had him in his older age then with that Bathsheba thing. And then they had him after that. So, he could have been, he wouldn't have been 50, because David wasn't 20, David was 30. And it might have been another 20 years till that happened. And so David might have been 50 at the time, and now, Solomon would be 20 and David around 70. So, he was not an old man, though, that's for sure. He was a young man, according to this. So I couldn't find a picture of a younger looking man for that one. But anyway, okay, so he says he's young, okay, a child. Okay, so he's not a child, but he's probably just young and inexperienced, like around 20. Anyway, so, and let me pick up from 8. And your servant is, and like he doesn't know what, he's inexperienced, like how to go out and come in, that kind of thing. So, and it's David passed away, that's why he's taking over here. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this great people of yours? Okay, so Solomon was already wise in the fact that he asked for more wisdom. He saw that he had great responsibility on his shoulders and he wanted to do the job well. He wanted to be a good ruler. He wanted things to go well for the nation, for the people, for everything. So he had a good thing in his heart to do that, and to ask for wisdom, because he knew he would need that for this job. So I find that highly commendable. And then God seems to be pretty happy about it too, because here the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing, and have not asked long life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. See, that's the point, justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I also have given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. So basically God tells him, you didn't ask for all the worldly things, riches and glory and all that, maybe women, all that stuff. So honor, he asked for wisdom so he could execute justice and be a good ruler and do well for everybody. So that is noble. And so because of that, of course, God would be very happy with that. And because of that, he not only gives him that, but he gives him all these other things as a reward as well. And boy, does he get it. You'll see. Okay. Then Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. Okay, and now here, this is the thing. He exercises judgment right away, and it's the case with two women, and they have a baby, and they argue about whose baby it is, and he has a wise answer. So it's good. I mean, there are things in here that are good. I just don't want to read every little thing. You can read that and you'll see, what he does with that. So, but anyway, he asks for wisdom and he gets it. Now, in 1 Chronicles 28 and 2 Chronicles 2 through 7, that's where it describes how he builds the temple, and it has a lot of details about building the temple, the materials used and so on, and the designs and things. So you can look at that. But he builds the temple, so that gets done. In 1 Kings 5 through 6, it mentions the Ark of the Covenant is placed inside the temple. And there are certain things I will read. I just don't want to read every detail here. Now, in this chapter 4 over here, 1 Kings 4, there's a section here. It talks about his administration, but in verses 20 on, it has something interesting. So I'll read this section here. So prosperity and wisdom of Solomon's reign. So he really is the height of the glory of this kingdom here at the time. Okay, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines. So he had a large area. I think this was the Euphrates here. Yeah, down here it says Euphrates. So it was a large area. It was almost like a little empire at the time. Okay. As far as the border of Egypt, they brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Now, Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl, which is birds. For he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river from Tifsa even to Gaza, namely over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on every side all around him. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Okay, so Solomon was given a peaceful reign, a time of peace in his reign, a time of prosperity in his reign, and wisdom, obviously. Now, Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. I mean, can you imagine? And these governors, each man in his month, provided food for King Solomon and for all who came to King Solomon's table. There was no lack in their supply. They also brought barley and straw to the proper place for the horses and steeds, each man according to his charge. So there was a rotating system, and I don't know the whole arrangement, but anyway. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart, like the sand of the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. Now, he's the one who wrote, like the Proverbs, a lot of them, and different sections like that. So Ecclesiastes he wrote, and others. But I'm sure that wasn't all. So I forgot. There were some Psalms too, but different things he wrote. So anyway, 31. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezraite, and Heman, Chalcol, and Darda, whoever they are, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Also, he he knew about a lot of other things too. He spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish. And men of all nations from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. So, he sounds like sort of a genius, really. Okay, now here's the temple thing. Now there's more. Here he builds the temple. Okay, so he does that work, and there are a lot of details mentioned about it, but I want to jump over to chapter 10. Okay, this is other buildings it mentions, and then the ark brought into the temples, chapter 8. So there's that. Solomon gives a speech when the work is done and it's dedicated. Oh yeah, I'll come back to that. There's something I'll read there that's interesting. But right now, oh, this is Second Chronicles. Okay, let me go over there. I'll be back to this. Let me stick this in here. Okay, Second Chronicles. Let's see. I have one. Okay, yeah, this one also is where Solomon requests wisdom. So it's the same thing, God says, yes, I'll give you wisdom and more. So yeah, it's sort of a little more abbreviated than the other one. So, but it's the same thing. So anyway, that's why that's there. Okay, now chapter 9. This is temple stuff here. Now here, this one. And so it's here. It's okay, Second Chronicles chapter 9, 1 through 28, is where the Queen of Sheba comes to visit and praise Solomon for all his wisdom and so on. Now let's see this. There's this one. And it goes till, yeah, that's till 28. But over here in chapter 10 is the same thing. So here the Queen of Sheba comes and, visits him. So that one is 29 verses. So I'll read this. Now when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels that bore spices, very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she spoke with him about all that was in her heart. So Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing so difficult for the king that he could not explain it to her. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. Like she was done. She was out of breath. Just probably her jaw dropped to the floor and she had speechless, right? So then she said to the king, "It was a true report which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and saw with my own eyes. And indeed, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame of which I heard. Happy are your men, and happy are these your servants, who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who delighted in you, setting you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord has loved Israel forever. Therefore, he made you king to do justice and righteousness." That's a nice compliment, like God put you in charge because he loved that nation, and he knew you would do good for them, so he put you in charge because he knew, they would get good from you being in charge, and that's what he wanted. So God, so that's a nice compliment. I think that was very fitting, but nice. Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, spices in great quantity, and precious stones. There never again came such abundance of spices as the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Also, the ships of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought great quantities of almug wood and precious stones from Ophir. And the king made steps of the almug wood for the house of the Lord and for the king's house, also harps and stringed instruments for singers. Oh, there never again came such almug wood, nor has the like been seen to this day. Now King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired, whatever she asked, besides what Solomon had given her according to the royal generosity. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. So they were pretty impressed, right? So his wisdom was famous all in the surrounding lands. Here, the weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. It says the same thing in Chronicles, so I don't know why it had to be that number, but anyway, maybe there's some significance. I have not figured that out. Besides that, from the traveling merchants, from the income of traders, from all the kings of Arabia, and from the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 shields of hammered gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. So they must have had an interesting house, maybe with wood panels on the wall. I would have done this kind of thing for sure. Okay, I have my own imagination of what I would do. Anyway, moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round at the back. There were armrests on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the armrests. 12 lions stood there, one on each side of the 6 steps. Nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom. So he really had splendor, like this stole the show from all the kingdoms. Nobody had had this ever until his time. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was silver, for this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. Wow, can you imagine? Wow. For the king had merchant ships at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the merchant ships came bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. Now, all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Each man brought his present. That's a good way to get an income, right? Anyway, articles of silver and gold, garments, armor, spices, horses, and mules at a set rate year by year. That works. Yeah. Anyway, and Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar trees as abundant as the sycamores which are in the lowland. Also Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Keveh. The king's merchants brought them in Keveh at the current price. bought them at the correct price. Now, a chariot that was imported from Egypt cost 600 shekels of silver, and a horse 150, and thus through their agents they exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. Okay, so that's, the wealth he had. And I mean, I'm not one to focus on these things, but I just wanted to share that because he really had a kingdom of splendor. And the thing is, that is also a type of the millennium. See, so that will be way better, but it's just a small sample of a picture. So, I just wanted to read it for that reason. Now, over here, okay, so we had Wisdom and Splendor of Solomon, Queen of Sheba visits. Okay, now I'm going to go back to 1 Kings 8 and read this thing when he dedicates the temple. Okay, now there's one spot in particular. Okay, so the ark brought into the temple. So the temple is done, finished. He brings the ark in from the tabernacle and puts it in the temple. So this is done. Okay, and then Solomon. So, okay, I'll just read this little part. Here. This is where I was actually looking for. Oh, and I want to read this little thing here too. Nothing was in the ark. So the ark, that's that gold container with the angel statues on top that the priests always carried around. Okay, that's the ark of the covenant, sometimes called the ark of the testimony. So here, nothing was in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone which Moses put there at Horeb when the Lord made a covenant with the children of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. So those were the 2 tablets, with the 10 commandments that Moses got on the mountain. That's all it was in the ark. And some people might wonder, why were they carrying that everywhere? Well, I mean, what this symbolizes, the tablets in the ark are a symbol of God's law in our heart, okay? And how that works as a Christian is God literally puts his law in your heart through the Holy Spirit. And it's not like the law in a sense of you got to get, obviously we don't get circumcised for these reasons today. We don't do those things like they did back then. But it's the law in the sense of what is the meaning of it? What is the spirit of it? What's behind it all? It's love God and love your neighbor, everything Jesus said. So all those things, though, that kind of law gets put in our heart at that time. And that's what that symbolizes. And then, okay, so next we have, and it came to pass when the priests came out of the holy place. So they were doing their thing. Okay, they had offered sacrifices and, that kind of, ceremony for like dedicating everything after it was all done, Okay, so when the priest came out of the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not continue ministering because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. So that's what would happen from time to time. And this is when it happened here. The temple was done. Everything was dedicated. They brought the ark in. They made their sacrifices. Whatever they would do, incense, singing, praying, everything they did, they did. Okay, so then this happened. It was like God's way of accepting it and, receiving it. And he filled it like with the Spirit, basically. So of course, that's a type of the Holy Spirit filling our hearts, because we are the temple of the Holy Spirit as true Christians. And it's that kind of a feeling, honestly. So, anyway, that's what happened here. And I want to mention, this is the only time that this happens. This temple goes on well for a while. Later, there are problems, and I'll get to that. Eventually, it gets destroyed with Babylon. They come back and rebuild it, and they dedicate it again, and all this and back and forth. This event never occurs again. This is a one-time thing right here with this glory filling the temple, okay? I just want to mention that. Then Solomon spoke. The Lord said he would dwell in the dark cloud. I have surely built you an exalted house and a place for you to dwell in forever. Okay, so that's what he says. And then Solomon gives a speech at the completion of the work. And yeah, and it just is a review, like where God says the son Solomon will build the temple. David wanted to do it, but Solomon was chosen to do the work. Then he has a prayer of dedication here. There's a lot of this stuff going on. Like and again, that whole thing, like if they fall, they can repent and come here and that kind of thing. So that goes, it's pretty long. So he's kneeling and lifting his hands and praying all this, and as he dedicates it. And so anyway, then that's it. He blesses the assembly. He dedicates the temple. It's all happening, and it's such a nice, sincere prayer that he prays about all this. So it's long, but so he's kneeling and praying all this, and let me see. He had a feast then after that to celebrate. And okay, so 9, God appears to him again and tells him, oh yeah, that's where he tells him, this I think is the place where he tells him, someone will sit on your throne forever, that thing. Then it goes on with other achievements of his. And then the Queen of Sheba. So anyway, so it goes on like that. There are a lot of details about duties and materials and supplies and who's going to do what and genealogies and so on. So I won't read all that, but now I will read this thing. Yeah, I'll read this some of this at least here. So this goes on good for a while, okay? He does well. It's all wonderful. It's there's a lot of splendor and majesty in this kingdom, and everything's great, And it goes well for a long time. I don't know how long. And he does get a lot of wives. I mean, I think it was 700 wives and 300 concubines, so a total of 1,000. Okay, the man had 1,000 options every night, okay? That's a lot, okay? I think that's a little too much. But anyway, that's what the deal was. So, okay, now, so this went on, and now you know how things go when you're rich and you're satisfied and you're well fed, and you know how that goes. You get comfortable and you get a little bit, and then this happens. Dun, dun, dun. Solomon's heart. Yeah, that's what happens. Okay, so I'll read some of it here. But, so chapter 11, it's still First Kings, because I know I'm jumping around with Chronicles, but this is Kings. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. See, Solomon clung to these in love, and here it is. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. David didn't fall into apostasy, but Solomon did. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not fully follow the Lord as did his father David. Okay. Let's see. Then Solomon, now it gets worse. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. So the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned from the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. Okay, so now this was the consequence. He fell into apostasy and he got consequences. So that's where you get this separation. Judah is where Jerusalem is in, so that's the place where that kingdom is. And then the kingdom to the north was Israel. So there were going to be two kingdoms, and this is what happens. So now the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, and it goes on with, now he starts to get trouble. He gets adversaries and problems and all this kind of thing creeps in. So this is what happens now. Here where did that go? Here. Well, I'll read that first, and then I'll do this little part here. So this video is almost done. I just want to finish up about Solomon here. So the death of Solomon is over. So this goes on, and then he dies. Now, I don't know if he repented in the end or not. I mean, we all hope so, right? But I don't know. So here it just says, now the rest of, this is still chapter 11, the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did, all his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? Okay, so they had other recordings, history books, here and there. And in the period that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. Then Solomon rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David his father. And Rehoboam, his son, reigned in his place. Okay, so, and then in 2 Chronicles 9, verses 29 to 31, it records the same thing. So the death of Solomon. And then it also in 1 Kings 11 mentions how the kingdom is going to be split apart. That was prophesied there. And what they, in 1 Kings 12 through 22 and 2 Chronicles 10 through 36, this is what happens. So they get two kingdoms, like, I said, one in the south and one in the north. The southern kingdom is Judah, and the northern kingdom is just called Israel with the other tribes in it. And they'll have two kings, one in the north, of course, and one in the south. So Solomon's son takes over that one, and then they get another king in the north. And so they end up with two lines of kings, and one in the north and one in the south. What happens is, in the north, the line is pretty much all bad kings. In the south, it's sort of an alternating pattern between a good king and a bad king. And more or less, it's almost like, it goes up and down constantly with good and bad kings. And some are worse than others, and some of the good ones are better than other good ones. So that varies, but that's what happens this whole time. This is what happens. That goes on all the way up until Babylon comes in, and Syria comes and takes the north captive, and then Babylon takes the south captive. So when they return, I think that's when it becomes one nation again. But anyway, this goes on until then. Now, before I end the video, I wanted to mention this last thing about, it's funny, it's right here, so I'm going to leave that right there. You hear about all their false gods. I mean, they had the Ashereths, they had the Baals, this Chemosh thing, they had Molech, there was a Milcom mentioned, and there are others, I don't know, here and there, they're mentioned. So what I did was I did an internet search looking up all these false gods to see. I just wondered what did they do? Like, was it just burning incense or what? What exactly did they do? So on each case, so I looked this up, and I mean, I could only find out so much, but what I found out was they, for the most part, this involved sexual immorality. Okay, they had like temple prostitutes, all kinds of sex. Okay, they had all kinds of perversion, and then they had, I mentioned this, the child sacrifice they did with Molech. They also did other human sacrifices, and they did, not children. And then they had animal sacrifices too, and they burned incense too. So, I mean, all of that, and there might have been feasts. They had their own priests, and they would, and mentioned this in one place, that they would slash themselves with knives when they were like upset with something. And we'll see this later with Elijah, with the false priests, when that comes up soon. But these are the things they did. Okay, so there were a lot of practices involved. And when I was reading the history, there was a case where Israel was at war with, I guess it was Moab, I forgot, but one of those nations. And it says that the king who was in battle sacrificed his firstborn son. And it doesn't say he sacrificed him, it just says he had him, he killed him and hung him on a wall or something like this. Well, it turns out that was a sacrifice, and because I looked that up, and their religion, they would do that. And kings in battle, when they had a petition to their god, they would sacrifice their firstborn child, in this case a son, in hopes that they would win the victory. So that's what he was doing. And it didn't work. Israel won because God was with them. So, and he got mad, and he took off with his army because they lost and all this, and he went off angry back to his own land. So I read that into history, and I read this detail later, and it was like, oh, that's what it was. Okay, so all these things were going on. It's pretty it's just wild. But anyway, that's the deal with the false gods. So, and we have to consider what today would be the equivalent of these things, right? So it's interesting to think about that. It might not look as obvious, but things are still happening, right? I mean, there's that one holiday coming up at the end of this month, which is one of the most, or the most evil one of all of them. And it's even listed as the biggest holiday on the calendar of the Church of the Devil. Okay, look it up if you don't believe me, but they take that seriously, and it is getting more evil every year. You see all the abominations everywhere, and don't think that's where it ends. I see these signs every time of year this month. I see signs: missing children, missing animals, pets. That's what's happening. So it's evil. Okay, so Christians should take no part in that. Don't even do a jack-o'-lantern. Don't do anything to have to do with that. Have nothing to do with it at all whatsoever. All of it has a root in evil and paganism. And there's a lot of research you can do on the internet if you want to look into that. But definitely avoid that. And there are other things, of course, that have to do with false religions. These practices like yoga. You got to stay away from that. You can't get involved in that. Comes from false gods. Okay, you research that. All right, there's no such thing as Christian yoga. There's nothing Christian about this stuff, and you can't clean it up and sanctify it. You cannot do that. It's false religion, false gods. Okay, stay away from it. You don't need that. Okay, you have everything you need if you're a Christian. If you want to do some exercise, take a walk around the block. Okay, all right, good. So that is it for the Solomon video. Now, I will be back and do another one in a little while. Okay, I'll be back. God bless.